Good evening, this is Mr. Wintermelon. So we have came a long way. We have learned about various systems such as our digestive system, our transport system, as well as our reproductive system. But how do we grow up and eventually obtain the sex cell required for reproduction? For this, we have to learn about cell division. So just a brief chapter overview. There will be 3 videos in this chapter of cell division. In this video, we are going to go through some terminology. It is very important that you understand what I am talking about. Because if I don't go through the terminology like what is this called, what is that called, you will probably not know what is going on. The next video will be on mitosis, and the last video will be on meiosis. What are those? We are going to go through in this video, but the detail we'll go through in the next 2 lessons. As mentioned, this video will be on some of the terms involved in cell division. You must pay extra attention to this because it is like the name of your classmate. You need to know the name of your classmate. If not, you will not be able to function well as a class. So by the end of this lesson, you should be able to state what is meant by homologous pair of chromosomes, define the term haploid, diploid, and explain the need for a reduction division process prior to fertilization in sexual reproduction. And lastly, you need to state that mitosis is important for growth and repair as well as asexual reproduction. Before we continue, let us recap what is found inside the nucleus of our cell. Inside the nucleus of our cell, there is our genetic material or DNA in the form of chromatin. But what exactly is chromatin? To answer that, I actually have a question for all of you. Think about it. How long do you think our DNA in one of our cells can stretch out? Make a smart guess, try to Google or something, and you will find that the answer is actually 2 to 3 meters long. Now, that is very long. How does our cell squeeze so much DNA or chromatin inside the small little cell? What I have down here is a string of paper clip. They will serve as analogy for our DNA. As you can see, this string of paper clip is rather long. In the case of human DNA, as mentioned, they can stretch up to 2 to 3 meters long. So how does the cell manage to contain this long strand of DNA into this tiny little cell? What the cell has is this protein called histone, which I will use MANAC as analogy for the protein. Look at what happened when I add a histone to the string of DNA. You can see that the DNA will start coiling around the protein histone. So if we have a lot of this histone, you can see that the length of the DNA will be shorter because the DNA will coil around this protein, like how your spaghetti coil around its Swedish meatball. And just take note, you actually do not need to know the name of the protein. You just need to know that, oh, DNA actually coils around this protein. So eventually, you can see that when they are all coiled up, it becomes much shorter. But of course, the actual coiling is much more uniform and neater. And another thing of is the size of DNA with respect to histone. Histone is actually a lot bigger than the width of the DNA. So in actual fact, you would probably not be able to see the DNA if the histone is this size. DNA will be just the width of the spider web, and they will coil around histone. So what you will normally get is this string known as chromatin with DNA coiling around it. This chromatin, even though you might see that, oh, it's quite thick, it's still too narrow to be observed under a light microscope. So they are not condensed enough. But DNA will spend most of its time in this chromatin state until the cell is about to divide. When the cell is about to divide, chromatin will start to fold itself, or what we call condense. So chromatin will start to condense, and you should be able to see that it is thicker right now. So as it becomes thicker and thicker, you will be able to see it under a microscope. And when you are able to see them under the microscope during cell division, we call it a chromosome, which I will use the plasticine as analogy for chromosome. So during cell division, chromosome will be visible under the light microscope, but chromatin will not be visible. Let me pause the video and just recap what we have just learned. First, we have our DNA, which was the paperclip. In the following chapter, that means the next chapter, you will learn that DNA, its structure is in the form of double helix. Not very important that you know this at the moment, because we are dealing with something that is bigger in scale. And for all intents and purposes, right now you just have to know that the DNA is like a string, like the string of paperclip, just that it's a lot more finer than the paperclip. So we start off with our DNA, and as learned from the video, the DNA actually coils around the protein called histone, and they become chromatin. So this chromatin is actually not visible under our normal light microscope. The chromatin that you see in the diagram actually is from an electron microscope. So our DNA is normally in the form of chromatin. So it will spend most of the time in this chromatin form. But when the cell is about to divide, they will condense to form chromosome. And this chromosome that you see down here is actually visible under a light microscope. So normally when we talk about plant or animal, when we are describing the amount of genetic material they have, we will use the term chromosome, like this animal have how many chromosomes, that plant have how many chromosomes, rather than this animal have how many chromatin and that plant have how many chromatin. Even though chromatin is how the DNA spends most of its time. And this is because we are able to see chromosome first, and this term stuck with us. But just bear in mind, they are actually the same thing, just that chromosome is a more condensed version of chromatin. It is similar to you standing upright and you curling down or squatting on the floor. You are still you are not a different person. So chromatin and chromosome, they are the same thing, just that chromosome is more condensed, so we can see them under a light microscope. Let's continue with the video. For human, we have 46 chromosomes or 23 pairs of chromosomes. The first 22 pairs are known as the autosome, while the last pair is known as the sex chromosome, which will determine a person's gender. I am only showing all of you 4 pairs of chromosomes because 23 is too many, but you should be able to see that each pair have different length. But within the pair itself, each of them actually have the same length. Now you might notice that, hey, how come one set of the 23 is one color, then the other set is another color? Because one set actually comes from your father, while the other set comes from your mother. In each chromosome, there are genes. Genes are sequence of DNA in a chromosome that codes for a protein or a characteristic. For example, your blood group, your hair color, or whether you have single or double eyelid. So, a gene is a sequence of DNA in the chromosome that codes for a protein or a particular characteristic or traits. Now, if we take a look at a pair of chromosomes of the same length, they actually have a name for this. This pair of chromosomes, one from your father, one from your mother, they are known as homologous chromosomes. So this is a pair of homologous chromosomes, this is another pair of homologous chromosomes, and this is another pair of homologous chromosomes. One is from your father, one is from your mother. Before the cell undergo cell division, when it is in the chromatin form, okay, that one is DNA form. When it's in the chromatin form, it will actually replicate or copy itself. So, during cell division, instead of looking like this, you will actually have something that is like this. So you can see that the longest pair from your mom have actually copied itself or replicated. The longest pair from the father have also replicated. So these two pairs, they are identical, while the purple and the brown, they are similar because they can have the same gene that codes for a particular characteristic, but they might code for different protein, or one might not code for any protein. For example, one might have blood group A, the other one might have blood group B. So even though they are the same chromosome, but because one is from the father, one is from the mother, they might have different form of the same gene. So just bear this in mind. After they replicate, you will actually have 4 strands. But the identical strand, we still call it one chromosome, this identical strand, we still call it one chromosome because the genetic material, they are identical. The information here in these two are identical. And we actually have a name for this. This pair is known as sister chromatid. Sister chromatid. So we have two sister chromatid here. Sister chromatid, sister chromatid, sister chromatid. While these are known as homologous chromosome. One homologous chromosome, another homologous chromosome, because they are of the same length. But because the genetic material, they are identical, we still call it one chromosome. One chromosome. But one sister chromatid, another sister chromatid. So this part is just a bit confusing that you have to take note. Sister chromatid is just a replication of one chromosome. They are identical. Homologous chromosome, they are similar. They share the same gene, but it might be different version. Now, there's a lot of things to absorb, but let's put them in words. What we learned before is chromatin is basically DNA coiling around the protein histone. But just before the cell replicate or the cell divide, the chromatins will copy itself or replicate itself. So it will have another copy, and these two copies of the same chromatin will form sister chromatids. So just take note of the difference in spelling. One is chromatin, one is chromatids or sister chromatids. They are identical. They are exactly the same because it is an exact copy. Chromosomes are a pair of coiled up sister chromatids, and they are visible under the light microscope. So we have a pair of sister chromatids, and this is a chromosome. But when the sister chromatids separate during cell division, later on you will learn that sister chromatids, they will separate. They will become two independent chromosomes. So originally there's one chromosome, then after they get pulled apart, we get two chromosomes. So when the chromatins are joined together, they are known as sister chromatids. When they are pulled apart and become independent, they will be independent chromosome, or we call them the daughter chromosome. So this is very similar to your 油条 or 油炸粿. If you ask the auntie, please give me one 油炸粿, the auntie will not tear the 油炸粿and give you one. The auntie will hand you like both, something like the sister chromatids. Then when you tear the 油炸粿 into two, you actually get two 油炸粿. So sister chromatids and chromosome is very similar. One chromosome became two chromosomes when they are pulled away from each other. And the sister chromatids will change the name to chromosome. For the case of human, as mentioned, we have 23 pairs of chromosomes if you are a normal person. 22 pairs are autosome, that means not sex chromosome. Then the one pair is sex chromosome, X and Y, which will determine your gender. Now, the picture that you might be familiar with when we talk about chromosome or human chromosome is this. You will see 23 pairs of our chromosome in the diagram. Since you see a pair, you might think that, oh, this pair is sister chromatids. But if you look carefully, the sister chromatids is actually already joined together in one of the chromosomes. And instead, the pair is not a pair of sister chromatids. The pair there is actually known as homologous chromosome. So a pair of homologous chromosome refers to the pair of chromosomes that have the same length and size. As explained in the video, one is inherited from the mother, one is inherited from the father. That means you receive one from your father and one from your mother. Homologous chromosomes are similar but not identical, meaning to say that, okay, maybe this pair of homologous chromosomes, they actually have some code for your blood group. But one of the homologous chromosome can be coding for blood group A, the other one could be coding for blood group B. So you will end up with blood group AB. So you can see that while they code for the same thing, which is blood group, the blood type which they code for is different. So they are similar but not identical. Now I want to introduce to you the word diploid. Diploid is used to describe having two sets of chromosomes, or 2N. N is the number of pairs of chromosomes a species have. For human, N is equals to 23, so 2 times 23 is 46. Our normal body cells are diploid. On the other hand, haploid is used to describe having only a single set of chromosomes, or N. Our gametes or sex cell are haploid. That means for the case of human, our sperm and egg, they only have 23 chromosomes, while all the rest of our cells, well, besides red blood cell, have 46 chromosomes. Lastly, let's go through some information that will come in handy because they are kind of needed to appreciate the term genetic variation. So each chromosome or chromatin actually contains genes. What are genes? So a gene is a unit of inheritance, a small sequence of DNA that codes for a protein or control a particular characteristic. The previous example that I have given is your blood group. It can also control for your eye color, your hair color, whether you are blonde or whether you are brunette. For example, this pair of homologous chromosomes each have 4 genes. That means that part of the chromosome actually codes for a protein. The position of the genes on each homologous chromosome is the same. That means if the red color region codes for blood type on one of the homologous chromosome, on the other homologous chromosome, it must be on the same location. It cannot be like, let's say, the yellow spot which codes for your blood group. And the last term that you need to know is alleles. Alleles are different forms of the same gene. For example, gene for our blood group has 3 alleles, which is A, B, and O. So alleles is a term whereby we describe different forms of the same genes. So just bear in mind that genes have different forms, and we use the term alleles when we are talking about the different forms. And lastly, let's just briefly go through the function of the 2 types of cell division. The first is mitosis. Mitosis is the form of cell division that produces 2 genetically identical daughter cells containing the same number of chromosomes as the parent cell. They are important for growth, replacement of worn-out cells, as well as asexual reproduction in some species. The other type of cell division is known as meiosis. It is the form of cell division that will produce 4 daughter cells, each containing half the number of chromosomes, so they are haploid when compared to the parents. This is needed for sexual reproduction, and it only occurs in reproductive structures such as ovary, testes, or anther. and it will give rise to genetic variation. So mitosis and meiosis, the name is pretty similar. Of course, I have an easy way of remembering which is which. For mitosis, since it is for growth, mitosis sounds like 买东西, which is buying items. So if the item you buy is food, you eat food so that you can grow. So 买东西 is for you to grow. So mitosis is for growth. How about meiosis? Since meiosis is related to sexual reproduction, just imagine when you were a child, maybe kindergarten or even younger, when you accidentally stumble into your parents' room and they are making out. So your parents will be shocked, then they will scramble for blanket and they will come and tell you, 没有事,没有事,没有事, which means there's nothing to see, carry on, move on. So 没有事,没有事,没有事 is what your parents tell you when you caught them doing sexual reproduction. And this is how you remember 买东西 and 没有事, mitosis and meiosis. Lastly, here are the list of new words or new terms that you have learned. So make sure you know each of their definition, especially those that are highlighted in red. For genes and alleles, I am going to go into further detail in the next chapter. So don't worry too much about genes and alleles. For chromatins and chromatids or sister chromatids, the spelling are very similar and people might confuse the two terms. So my advice is chromatins versus chromatids. The sister chromatids, the ending sounds like tits, and only sister have tits. So sister chromatids. The other one will be chromatin, which is the form that DNA stays in most of the time. Then we have homologous chromosome. Make sure you know what's the difference between homologous chromosome and sister chromatids. Diploid, haploid, mitosis and meiosis, we are going to go into further detail in the next 2 lessons. So this will be all. Make sure you know what the following terms refers to.